Picture this. March 20th, 1991, New York City. A man sits alone in his hotel room, staring at a guitar he can't bring himself to touch. Just hours earlier, his 4-year-old son fell from a window 53 floors up. The boy is gone. The man is Eric Clapton. And for the first time in his life, music means nothing. This is the story of a man they called Slow Hand, a nickname that came from the slow, deliberate way he'd replace a broken guitar string on stage while crowds waited in silence. But there was nothing slow about Eric Clapton's fall from grace or his rise back up. You know his songs: Layla, Wonderful Tonight, Tears in Heaven. You've heard his guitar cry and sing and scream, but you might not know the man behind those sounds. The man who survived when Jimi Hendrix didn't, when Duane Allman didn't, when so many others didn't. Eric Clapton lived through more pain than most people could handle. He was abandoned as a child, lied to about who his real mother was. He battled heroin addiction so bad that he disappeared for 3 years. He stole his best friend's wife. He lost the love of his life to another man's arms. And then he lost his son to a moment of terrible accident. But here's what makes Eric Clapton's story worth telling. Every time life knocked him down, he got back up with his guitar. Every tragedy became a song. Every loss became music that touched millions of people around the world. This isn't just the story of a rock star. It's the story of a human being who turned his deepest pain into some of the most beautiful music ever created. A man who went from being called God by his fans to feeling completely godless and alone. Some people say you can't understand Eric Clapton's music without understanding his suffering. Others say his suffering doesn't excuse the hurt he caused other people along the way. Both sides might be right. What we know for sure is this: Eric Clapton picked up a guitar when he was 13 years old, and it saved his life. Then it nearly destroyed his life. Then it saved him again. He's 79 now. His hands shake a little when he plays. His voice isn't as strong as it used to be, but he's still here, still playing, still searching for that perfect note that might somehow make sense of all the love and loss and music that filled up his 79 years on this earth. This is a story about a boy who never knew his father, a teenager who got kicked out of art school and had nowhere to go, a young man who played guitar so well that people wrote "Clapton is God" on walls around London, a rock star who had everything money could buy but couldn't stop the drugs from taking it all away. It's about a friend who betrayed his best friend for love, a father who lost his child in the most horrible way imaginable, an addict who finally got clean when it was almost too late. But most of all, it's about how music can be both a blessing and a curse. How the same gift that makes you famous can also make you feel more alone than you've ever felt in your life. Eric Clapton once said that playing guitar was the only thing he was ever really good at. He was wrong about that. He was also good at surviving, good at turning his mistakes into lessons, good at showing the rest of us that it's possible to keep going even when everything falls apart. You're about to hear about a life that had more ups and downs than most people could survive. About a man who made beautiful music and terrible choices, sometimes at the same time. About how someone can be both a hero and a human being, with all the glory and mess that comes with both. Eric Patrick Clapp was born on March the 30th, 1945, in a small English town called Ripley. But that's not the name he grew up with, and the people who raised him weren't who he thought they were. His mother was 16 when she had him, unmarried. In 1945, that was a scandal that could destroy a family's reputation. So they came up with a plan, a lie that would shape Eric's entire life. Rose and Jack Clapp told everyone that Eric was their son. What they didn't tell Eric was that Rose was actually his grandmother. The woman he called his sister, Pat, was really his mother. The father he never met was a Canadian soldier who had already gone back home. For 9 years, Eric lived this lie without knowing it. He called his grandmother Mom and his real mother Sister Pat. He wondered why Pat seemed different around him, why she paid him special attention, why she looked sad when she looked at him sometimes. Then one day when he was 9, kids at school started teasing him. They knew something he didn't. They told him Pat wasn't his sister. They told him his parents weren't really his parents. They laughed at him for not knowing the truth about his own family. Eric ran home and confronted Rose. Finally, she told him the truth. The people he thought were his parents were his grandparents. His sister was his mother. His real father was a stranger he'd never meet. School became harder. Eric couldn't focus. He wasn't good at sports. He wasn't popular with other kids. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker. The only thing that made him feel better was art. He could draw and paint for hours, losing himself in colors and shapes. When Eric was 13, his grandparents bought him his first guitar. It was a cheap acoustic guitar that cost about $15. They probably thought it would keep him busy and out of trouble. They had no idea they were about to change music history. Eric taught himself to play by listening to records, blues records mainly, Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson, Big Joe Williams. These were Black American musicians singing about pain and loss and hard times. Their music spoke to something deep inside Eric. Here were men who understood what it felt like to hurt. But this created another problem. Eric was a white kid in England trying to play Black American music. A lot of people thought that was wrong. Some said he had no right to play the blues because he hadn't lived through what those musicians had lived through. Eric didn't care. The blues was the only music that made sense to him. When he played those songs, he felt connected to something bigger than his small town and his family problems. He practiced for hours every day. His fingers bled from pressing the strings. His grandmother complained about the noise, but Eric kept playing. It was the only thing in his life that felt real. After high school, Eric got into art college, but he couldn't concentrate on his studies. All he wanted to do was play guitar. He skipped classes to practice. He failed his exams. After 2 years, the school kicked him out. Now Eric was 18, unemployed, and living with his grandparents who were disappointed in him. He had no job skills except for playing guitar, and nobody wanted to hire a guitar player who only knew the blues. He moved to London with almost no money. He lived in tiny, cold rooms with no heat. Sometimes he had to choose between buying food and buying guitar strings. He usually chose the strings. Eric tried to join band after band, but they all told him the same thing. Blues music was old-fashioned. People wanted to hear pop music, rock and roll, something that would make them dance, not think about their problems. Band leaders would listen to Eric play for a few minutes and then shake their heads. "You're too serious," they'd say. "People want fun music, not this heavy blues stuff." Eric felt rejected everywhere he went. His family had lied to him. Schools had kicked him out. Now the music world was turning him away too. He spent his days walking around London with his guitar, looking for any band that might give him a chance. He spent his nights playing alone in his room, wondering if he'd made a huge mistake choosing music over everything else. October 1963. Eric Clapton was 18 years old and running out of hope. He'd been turned down by so many bands that he'd stopped counting. Then a phone call changed everything. The Yardbirds needed a guitar player. They were a young band from London, and their lead guitarist had just quit. Someone had heard Eric playing at a small club and gave the band his name. When Eric showed up for the audition, the other band members weren't sure what to think. He was quiet, serious, and he only wanted to play the blues. But when he plugged in his guitar and started playing, something magical happened. His guitar didn't just make sounds, it told stories. Every note seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. The pain of growing up without knowing who his real parents were, the loneliness of being rejected over and over again, the hunger of sleeping in cold rooms with no money, all of it came pouring out through his fingertips. Suddenly, the Yardbirds were famous. They were on television shows. Teenage girls screamed when they walked on stage. Record companies wanted to sign them to big deals. But Eric hated For Your Love. He thought it sounded like cheap pop music. Where were the deep, soulful guitar solos? Where was the emotion that made blues music so powerful? To Eric, For Your Love was everything that was wrong with popular music. While his bandmates celebrated their success, Eric felt miserable. This wasn't why he'd picked up a guitar. He didn't want to make music that people forgot about 5 minutes after hearing it on the radio. The other members of the Yardbirds tried to convince Eric to stay. They reminded him that they were making good money now. They had fans. They were successful. But Eric made a decision that shocked everyone in the music business. He quit the Yardbirds right when they were becoming famous. People thought he was crazy. You don't walk away from a hit band. You don't give up money and fame to play music that most people don't even like. Eric didn't care what people thought. He knew that if he stayed with the Yardbirds, he'd have to keep playing music that felt fake to him. He'd rather be poor and play the blues than be rich and play songs he hated. Word spread quickly through London's music scene. Eric Clapton had quit the Yardbirds because they were too commercial. Musicians started talking about this young guitar player who cared more about artistic integrity than money. That's when John Mayall called. John Mayall led a band called the Blues Breakers. They were the real deal. a blues band that played the kind of music Eric loved. No pop songs, no trying to please radio stations, just pure, honest blues. Mayall had heard about Eric's reputation. He knew Eric could play guitar like nobody else in England. But more importantly, he knew Eric understood what the blues was really about. When Eric joined the Blues Breakers in 1965, everything changed. For the first time in his life, he was in a band that wanted him to play exactly the way he wanted to play. They encouraged him to take long, emotional guitar solos. They let him pour all his pain and loneliness into his music. The Blues Breakers weren't as famous as the Yardbirds, but they had something more important: respect. Serious musicians knew that John Mayall's band was where you went to really learn how to play the blues. Eric's guitar playing with the Blues Breakers was like nothing anyone had heard before. He combined the raw emotion of American blues with technical skills that amazed other musicians. His solos didn't just show off how fast he could play, they told stories about heartbreak and loss and hope. Then something incredible happened. Someone spray-painted "Clapton is God" on a wall near the Marquee Club in London. Soon, the same message appeared on walls all over the city. Eric Clapton was 20 years old, and strangers were writing on walls that he was God. The graffiti wasn't just about his guitar skills, it was about something deeper. People heard something in Eric's playing that spoke to their own pain and struggles. When Eric played the blues, it didn't sound like he was copying American musicians anymore. It sounded like he was telling his own story. Music critics started paying attention. They wrote articles about this young English guitarist who could make his guitar cry real tears. They said he was bringing the blues back to life for a new generation. Other musicians started coming to Blues Breaker shows just to watch Eric play. They'd stand in the audience with their mouths open, wondering how someone so young could play with so much feeling. Eric finally felt like he'd found his place in the world. He was playing the music he loved with musicians who respected him. People were starting to understand what he was trying to say with his guitar, but Eric was restless. He'd proven he could play the blues as well as anyone in England. Now he wanted to do something that had never been done before. He wanted to take the blues and make it louder, more powerful, more electric than anyone had ever imagined. Summer 1966. Eric Clapton was sitting in a London cafe when two musicians walked up to his table. Jack Bruce, a bass player with wild hair and an attitude to match. Ginger Baker, a drummer who played like his life depended on it and had a temper that scared other musicians. They had a crazy idea. What if they formed a band with just 3 people? Guitar, bass, and drums. No other instruments, no backup singers, just 3 men making as much noise as a full orchestra. Nobody had ever tried this before. Most bands had 4 or 5 members, sometimes more. 3 seemed too few. How could 3 people fill up a concert hall with sound? Eric was intrigued. He'd been thinking about leaving the Blues Breakers anyway. He wanted to try something new, something that would let him really stretch out and show what his guitar could do. They called themselves Cream. The name said it all. They were the cream of the crop, the best musicians in London coming together to create something nobody had ever heard before. Their first rehearsal was electric. Jack Bruce's bass didn't just keep rhythm, it danced and fought with Eric's guitar. Ginger Baker's drums didn't just keep time, they thundered and crashed like storm clouds. And Eric's guitar soared above it all, singing and screaming and crying all at once. When Cream played their first show, the audience didn't know what hit them. The music was louder than anything they'd ever experienced. It was blues, but it was also rock. And then came White Room, another song that would live forever. Eric's guitar seemed to paint pictures in the air. When he played the solo, you could actually see the white room he was singing about. You could feel the loneliness and the beauty and the sadness all mixed together. Cream started selling out the biggest venues in the world. Madison Square Garden in New York, the Royal Albert Hall in London. Places that usually hosted classical orchestras were now shaking with the sound of 3 men and their electric instruments. The crowds were unlike anything rock music had ever seen. People didn't just listen to Cream, they experienced them. Fans would close their eyes during Eric's guitar solos and let the music wash over them like waves. Some people said it was almost like a religious experience. Music critics struggled to find words to describe what Cream was doing. They invented new terms: heavy rock, power trio, psychedelic blues. Eric's guitar playing was called transcendent and otherworldly. One critic wrote that listening to Eric Clapton play guitar was like watching someone speak directly to God. Eric was becoming more famous than he'd ever imagined possible. His picture was on magazine covers. Teenage girls screamed his name. Other guitarists studied his every move, trying to figure out how he made his instrument sound so alive. The pain of loving someone he couldn't be with poured out in a song called Layla. The guitar riff that opens Layla is one of the most recognizable sounds in rock music. When people hear those first few notes, they know exactly what song it is. But it was Eric's guitar solo in Layla that really told the story. You could hear his heartbreak in every note. The way his guitar cried and pleaded and begged it was like listening to a man pour his heart out to a woman who couldn't love him back. But Eric was beyond hearing anyone's pleas. The heroin had taken over his brain completely. He spent 3 years as a recluse, barely leaving his house, seeing almost no one except drug dealers and other addicts. During this time, Pattie Boyd's marriage to George Harrison was falling apart. George was traveling constantly, pursuing spiritual interests that Pattie didn't share. He seemed more interested in meditation and Indian philosophy than in his wife. Eric, even in his drug-addled state, sensed an opportunity. He began calling Pattie more often, writing her letters, showing up at her house when George was away. Slowly, Pattie began to see Eric not just as George's friend, but as a man who was desperately in love with her. She was flattered by his attention, but also worried about what it would do to her marriage and to Eric's friendship with George. But Eric's influence goes beyond just guitar playing. He helped create entire genres of music that didn't exist before him. Heavy rock was born when Eric turned up his amplifiers with Cream and showed the world that volume could be an instrument all by itself. The power trio format guitar, bass, and drums became a template that bands still use today. Eric also helped introduce white audiences to Black American blues music. When he covered songs by Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters, and other blues masters, he brought those artists to people who might never have heard them otherwise. Some critics argue about whether this was cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation, but most of the blues musicians Eric covered were grateful for the attention. Muddy Waters himself said that Eric brought the blues to young white kids who needed to hear it. B.B. King, the king of blues guitar, became one of Eric's closest friends and collaborators. Eric understands that the blues isn't about race, King said. It's about being human. Pain is pain no matter what color you are. Eric's songs have become part of the soundtrack of people's lives. Wonderful Tonight has been played at thousands of weddings. Tears in Heaven has comforted countless parents who lost children. Layla has been the background music for movie love scenes, car commercials, and high school proms. These aren't just songs anymore. They're cultural touchstones that connect people across generations. A grandfather who saw Cream in the 1960s can share Sunshine of Your Love with his grandson, who's just learning to play guitar. The music creates bonds between people who might not have anything else in common. Eric's guitar auctions have raised millions of dollars for charity. In 1999, he sold dozens of his most famous guitars at auction, including Brownie, the Fender Stratocaster he used to record Layla. The auction raised $7.4 million for the Crossroads Center, his addiction treatment facility. Eric Clapton found his perfect note thousands of times over the course of his career. In the opening riff of Layla, in the gentle melody of Wonderful Tonight, in the heartbreaking simplicity of Tears in Heaven. But he keeps searching because he knows that the perfect note isn't something you find once and then you're done. It's something you have to find again and again every day for as long as you're alive. That might be the most important lesson of all, that the search itself is the point. That this documentary explores the complex and often painful journey of Eric Clapton, from his troubled childhood to his status as one of rock's most enduring figures. Much of Clapton's story has been pieced together from interviews, biographies, and media reports over the decades, though many details about his personal struggles remain unverified rumors and speculation. The film begins with the famous "Clapton is God" graffiti that appeared on London walls in the 1960s, immediately contrasting this mythic status with the very human struggles that allegedly defined his life. Born in 1945, Clapton reportedly discovered at age 9 that his sister was actually his mother, and his parents were his grandparents, a family deception that supposedly shaped his lifelong trust issues and emotional pain. These early wounds allegedly drove him to obsessive guitar practice, bleeding fingers raw, as he found escape in blues music that spoke to his inner turmoil. His breakthrough came with the Yardbirds in 1963, but reports suggest he left the successful band due to artistic differences over their pop direction, choosing integrity over commercial success. The formation of Cream in 1966 marked his rise to guitar god status, with Sunshine of Your Love cementing his reputation for emotional, technically brilliant playing that influenced countless musicians. However, success brought devastating personal costs. His rumored obsession with George Harrison's wife Pattie Boyd inspired Layla, but allegedly destroyed friendships and led to years of heroin addiction in the 1970s. Stories from this period describe a man so lost in drugs that he barely left his house, the guitar hero reduced to a shadow of himself. His recovery and reinvention came through the 1992 Unplugged performance, where acoustic versions of his songs revealed a more vulnerable artist. The tragic death of his 4-year-old son Connor in 1991, falling from a 49th floor window, reportedly inspired Tears in Heaven, transforming unimaginable grief into his most beloved song. Now in his late 70s, Clapton allegedly struggles with hearing loss and arthritis, the physical toll of decades performing, while finding peace in his marriage to Melia McKinney and raising 3 young daughters. His Crossroads Center continues his advocacy for addiction recovery, turning personal struggle into help for others. Throughout his career, Clapton's influence on guitar playing and rock music has been undeniable, teaching generations that emotional expression matters more than technical showmanship. However, it's important to note that many aspects of this narrative, particularly details about his family relationships, personal struggles, and private moments, are based on media reports, authorized and unauthorized biographies, and industry gossip that has accumulated over 50 years in the public eye. While Clapton has confirmed some elements of his story in interviews, much remains unverified speculation about one of rock's most private figures. What remains certain is his musical impact and his transformation from a young man seeking escape through guitar to an elder statesman who learned to channel pain into art that resonates with millions worldwide.